Jade Bryce, I'm so excited to have this conversation. Thank you for being a
Mhm.
guest on Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? What I find fascinating about you is that it feels like you're almost like a human personification of what is happening with sexuality on the planet right now. And that, that you used to be a Playboy model and lived at the Playboy Mansion, which, like is its own kind of its own accomplishment. And there's this own like celebration in that, and it's an external in, right? It's like by definition it's being done for the male gaze.
Right.
And now being a sacred sexuality coach and you having had these beautiful awakenings, it feels like you've been on this journey of reclamation, reclaiming your body for yourself, reclaiming your pleasure for yourself, and now helping others to do the same. But I think the story that is even more fascinating is, extraordinary amount of childhood trauma and even childhood sexual trauma that you have really like beautifully and bravely healed and reclaimed through your journey with sacred sexuality. So I'd just love to hear, like, we don't have to go super deep into it, but I guess maybe the thing that you feel most proud of when it comes to your reclamation, and specifically, how has pleasure helped you to integrate and heal some of this shadow from your past?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, the Playboy, and even, back into the 70s, it's like we had this external sexual revolution. And then I do feel like in these last couple of years that we're starting to have this internal sexual revolution that I think you're speaking of. And um, yeah, it's very interesting. And you know, I, I went on a podcast a couple of years ago where I was talking about, how I start my day with 13 orgasms and all of the things, and it was such a beautiful podcast. And then as soon as the recording button was hit to end the show, she just started crying and she was like, I've never had an orgasm. And it made me realize, like, at the time I was speaking about this, like, the power of pleasure and bringing it alongside your grief and all your parts. And I was, because I've never struggled to orgasm, I wasn't even considering that it's not actually accessible to everyone. And so I want to be sensitive to that. And I know you teach the blockages to pleasure and how to bring that, into something that is accessible, and what it is that causes it to be a difficulty. I think what I typically speak to is, in my experience, I never had trouble with pleasure, but my pleasure was so out, it was so disembodied. I was out of my body. It was something that, even though I was having pleasure and experiencing it in my body, I was still disconnected from it. So I was a very
I
sexual
remember you
child.
said that on the podcast interview. You said that even though I was living in the Playboy Mansion and even though I was like a Playboy bunny, I actually felt quite separated from my body. And I'll speak from my own experience that I was a Broadway performer. I was in Showgirl. I was in a chorus line. I was in Chicago. And so I'm like this kind of external embodiment of what people think is supposed to be sexy, and yet I had my own history of sexual trauma. And so there is as a survival mechanism, I think you have to disconnect your head from your body to some degree. And it's why I love this work so much, because regardless of your dexterity with pleasure, to me it's more about the reclamation, about this body is mine, this pleasure is mine, no matter where I am on that journey, and taking that back from either someone else's approval or someone else's experience if it was done in a non-consensual way. I think like that's why Layla says that Tantra is finding God where you thought that it was not.
Yeah.
And so if you can find God even inside of your abuse or inside of your shame, then the power that you can bring back is so monumental. And I
Yeah.
think that I mean, I've never met anyone that's done it on the scale that you've done,
Oh.
which is really, really inspiring.
Well, how interesting that, like, what you spoke to in your life, you would see someone on stage like that and think, what an expressed woman, what a fully expressed woman. But that was, you were still in shutdown. And here I am, published in Playboy a dozen times. And you think, wow, like, what a sexual woman, what a sensual woman. And that was where I was shut down the most. So it's almost like, um, our higher selves knew what they were doing, right? They put us in there to be able to feel like, wow, I'm so actually unexpressed, or I'm so actually, like, shut down in my sensuality. Um, and to back up a little bit,
Mhm.
or quite a bit, but I'll keep it short. You know, I was already very sexual as a child because I was exposed to sexuality very young. However, that is also why I was so disembodied with it. There was a lot of trauma and abuse in my home, but my birth father would abuse my mom so violently and then be sexual with her. And because I was so young, my nervous system still very commingled with her, and so it felt like I was experiencing that sexual trauma. And it wasn't in well, that'll be skipping ahead a little bit, so I'll just go to that. Then, you know, as a young child, I was very sexual with my friends. It was just what I knew, you know, and so but still at the same time, like because of the trauma, it, it was interesting. It was like I felt safe to play like that with my friends, but there was some sort of like trauma still like guiding it. And then when I was around 12, I experienced my first sexual assault. And you would think, you know, like when you speak of sexual trauma, you think of something big like that. But that's not actually in my mind what my first sexual trauma was. I think of the times that my mom saw me touching myself and she was like, smell your fingers now. I bet they smell disgusting. Or there was a time that I was 10 years old and you know, she came in and she was very, very violent with me at this age. And I was naked because I was getting ready for bed. And she came in and she said, started beating me because she saw that the dog pooped on the floor, and she was slamming my face in the poop. And when I fell back and I'm naked, I fell back, my legs opened, and she was like, no one wants to see your disgusting pussy. Close your legs. And so I'm here covered literally in dog shit, hearing these types of words about my most sacred parts.
Yeah.
And so those to me, like we think of something extreme like someone violating our body, but sometimes it's the words that are spoken to us about our most sacred parts, or about our sexual nature of touching ourselves, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but
And I
then when
just
the,
wanna do name that, like, just to just stand up for little Jade, that that is really extreme, especially when it's coming from your mother, and especially when it's insulting, especially in a vulnerable position, not from a place of love. Like, it would be hard to hear even if you were fully clothed at 16 years old driving to school.
yeah,
But to be a child, like, I just wanna really advocate for little Jade, and I also just wanna name for anyone listening to this who's feeling triggered, like even hearing it, like, can you just take a moment, take a breath, feel in your body? Is there anywhere in your body that you feel safe right now? Do you feel safe in your hands or your feet or your heart, or face safe in your clothes? Maybe taking a look around the room, noticing anywhere you feel safety in your room right now. And if it brings up stuff from your past, like, can we send a little bit of safety and love to the past versions of ourselves that experienced this? And what I want to celebrate for you right now is the fact that even though such an influential figure in your life was so disrespectful about your body, that you still know it to be your most sacred parts, is what you said. Really, really
yeah.
beautiful. So how did you come to that? Like, how did you, like, either maintain or reclaim that knowledge that this part of you, this matrix point for the entirety of civilization, the thing that birthed your two children, like, how did you come to know that as sacred?
Oh, it was a very long journey.
Mm,
So, and Playboy played a part in it.
mhm,
So, you know, after, because that was the most trauma that I'll speak to.
mhm,
Although, you know, there was a sexual trauma at 12. And the thing is I feel that like after sexual trauma, some people go along the lines of like promiscuity, and some go to like what people would call prude, right? I went
mhm.
towards the prude direction. Like after that, didn't was not sexual again until um, I was 20. And
Yeah.
so, you know, throughout my teen years, I shared with you that there were times that I was sleeping on benches, I was sleeping in the back of a car, sleeping at friends' houses, or most often I'd sleep in the smoking section of this 24-hour diner. At 17 years old, youth pastors adopted me. So I already had this sexual shutdown from my trauma, but then I went into a religious framework where it was sin, right? And
Mhm.
so that was it was like a double conditioning. And then in my 20s, you know, I left the church. It's a whole other story, but I left the church. I went to Hollywood. You know, I got signed by Playboy. And it was so interesting because I would shoot these photos with Playboy, and while I felt very comfortable nude, when I would actually see the images, I could not look at my yoni and feel proud of it. Like, I actually was quite embarrassed of it. And I couldn't look in the mirror without that feeling as well. And so there was the knowing of that, but it just felt normal to me. Like, I didn't know that I could look in the mirror and see beauty there. I didn't know
Mm,
that I could look in the mirror and see a portal there,
mm.
or feel that I could hear a yes or no from her. Like, I didn't know that any of that was even a thing. I just thought that that was normal to feel shame around, because it's what I had always been around as well from the women in my family. That's what's been passed down to me, because
No, I think
everyone in my
unfortunately,
family.
I do think that is normal. Like in
Yeah,
Regina's book, she says in chapter 1, here is this matrix point for the entirety of civilization, this organ that nature has given us expressly for the purpose of pleasure. And yet it's been used, this word has been used as the number one insult in the English language. And so even if you did not experience abuse, just the way, like likely the first time anyone heard the word pussy, it was as an insult or as something
apparently.
derogative or as like calling a man something like weak. And so if you own one of those, what does that do to your self-esteem? What does that do to your relationship? And then you're a case, it's so extreme and you got it both from your mother and from the church. So, okay, so you're saying like you didn't even know that it could be a place of beauty.
That's just
Exciting.
how I figured all women felt, because it was so normal to me, and it was where I came from.
Mhm.
But I was very, like, in my 20s, even though I was this ring girl and had this show on MTV, and was frequently at the Playboy Mansion, and published through Playboy, and like it seemed like I was just so confident in my body and so sexually and sensually expressed. I was still so shut down, and I was living in Hollywood, going on dates. If you can imagine, I was going on dates with all of these celebrities, and on our first date, I would be like, just so you know, I don't have sex until our wedding night. Like, that was what I would say on the first date. And every now and then desire would overcome me, but like for the most part, I was not sexual with people that I was dating in my 20s. And it's really funny because I actually went on a date with the guy from A Walk to Remember, which is like, that's a part of the storyline. And so it seemed like I was just trying to play the role of this like childhood, like, heartthrob movie. But yeah, that was still the role that I was playing in my 20s, because not only was I shut down, but I saw it as sin. I was terrified that like Jesus was going to come back. Even though I was a Playboy model, I had this idea that Jesus would come back and I would be in the middle of sex, and like, I had that programming. And so it actually wasn't until my 30s, if you can believe it. It's like, feels so late. It wasn't until my 30s, same as you, in 2020, where my life kind of blew up and went on this different timeline. I entered into my first safe relationship, like with a man who actually cared about my pleasure, with a man who, I dated plenty of good men that I pushed away, but this was the first good man I went into relationship with that was not violent with me, that was not screaming at me, that was not basically the imago match of my father. And when I got into that relationship was the first time that I realized, like, oh, I'm not here during sex. Like, he wants me to experience pleasure, and I can't receive from him. And then that caused me to look at my own relationship to pleasure with myself, and how even when I would experience multiple orgasms, which would come easily, I wasn't actually in my body. It was a very, like, it felt more like a release of energy instead of a circuit. I couldn't circulate the energy. I couldn't feel it within my body. And so I started to just ask those questions of why, what's there, and all the trauma started to come up. And at the time, it was so unclear because of what I had explained with my mother's nervous system and mine being commingled. It was so unclear on if that was actually done to me or not. And so I entered into some MDMA assisted therapy. And then the really big breaking point, or shift in timeline breakthrough, was when I did 5-MeO. And I'd already come face to face with all the trauma. I'd already, been diving deep into it,
And
but it
just to
was
let
laying.
people know, for folks, we've talked about it once or twice on the podcast, but 5-MeO is 5-MeO-DMT, and it's a very potent psychedelic or psychoactive, I should say, that comes from, it's a frog medicine. It's also known as bufo. I also did it about 3 weeks after asking for a divorce and was very much a part of one of my first, reawakenings and Kundalini awakenings. So just naming for people. A lot of people say that it's a death and rebirth portal. So just naming that 5-MeO for folks in case they haven't heard of it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say, is that it was a death and rebirth portal, so much so that I actually stopped breathing for 3 minutes, and the shaman took a dose to go retrieve my soul, is what he said. But what happened in that 3 minutes for me was all of that trauma that I had just spent like 6 months, like really deep diving into and quite terrified of. I felt it, like I felt the purity enter into my body, and I saw all these white roses, and then I became all these yonis as well. And then Mary Magdalene appeared. She anointed my lips in honey, anointed me in honey. And it was then that I really felt this shift of, or it felt like that all that trauma that I had been diving so deeply into then had this purpose and this anointing with it to alchemize it into living this purpose of being an example and teaching how to merge our sexuality with our spirituality, because I had kept it so separate all along, and how to experience our pleasure alongside all of the parts of us that we normally push away. Because I had pushed away, I had so much anxiety and depression and grief, and those were the parts that and my inner critic was so loud. And so I was trying so hard to silence those. And as you know, that doesn't work. We can't get rid of our inner critic. It doesn't
Just
work.
gets louder. The more you try and tell her to shush, she's just going louder.
Yeah. And so through that, it was that felt like such a death and rebirth. And from there is actually where I discovered Mama Gina's work. And that was, when you read her book, she says, say pussy out loud 3 times. And that was my first time saying the word in my entire life. I was 35 years old. And I was like, wow, like, why did that word feel so filthy before? And that was when I started to do, it was her book that brought me into looking in the mirror at my yoni and speaking loving affirmations. And then through her, I found Layla Martin. And then there I am a year later in Costa Rica, and we're literally doing affirmations to other people's yonis and doing, and it was just like, that is how much of a difference happened in 1 year from just simply asking the questions of, why can't I receive pleasure? Why am I not in my body when I have pleasure? It was like, all I did was ask the questions, and the answers came, and it, like your story, within a year my life was completely different.
Wow. Wow. First of all, I want to celebrate you for your bravery. I want to celebrate you for your curiosity, and also double click on the fact that this is the potency of this internal medicine. I mean, yes, you were doing therapy. Yes, you did external medicine as well. But that journey from like seeing your body as sacred, the journey from like, I'm not even saying this word, to now I'm doing Layla's teacher training, like this is a big journey. And the thing I want to just highlight for anyone listening is that no matter where you are on your journey with your body, no matter where you are on your journey with pleasure, no matter where you are on your journey with claiming your body as your own, or how much trauma you have in your nervous system, the thing that I want everyone to know is that the pleasure is simply a physical incarnation of love. This is a physical manifestation of love. And I very much believe that you can't have more than one emotion at the same time. One makes the other more acute, and then it cures it. It's one of my favorite lines from Aspects of Love, the musical, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. But you can't have more than one emotion at the same time. One makes the other more acute, and then it cures it. And so love, I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, there's a reason why every great superhero movie and every great romance movie and every great like novel is based on this idea that love is greater than fear. And so if the word even pleasure freaks you out to hear, or if you have some conditioning around the word pleasure that it feels wrong or shameful, can you replace that with the word love? Like, how much love do I have in my body? What is my capacity for love inside of my cells? And what I've found is that if the capacity for love gets bigger, it metabolizes that pain. I mean, the amount of trauma that you witnessed, and I don't even think you've shared even a tip of the iceberg of what you actually experienced. And yet, as much of the darkness, as much pain and fear as there was lodged in your cells, this love is greater than it and has transmuted it and allowed you to create this abundance and healing and life of service for yourself. And so I want to celebrate that inside of you. And I want to just draw the line back to our listeners and let them know that, like, this is why I've dedicated so much time and energy over the last 4 years. It's why we're birthing Ziva Magic, is to let people get started on this journey of cultivating and curating more love inside of their cells, not for the sake of pleasure. Like, just like I believe that we meditate to get good at life, not to get good at meditation, I also think that we practice pleasure, not exclusively for the point of pleasure,
Mm-mm.
but also to make us better at life, because it's the only force that I've found on the planet that is big enough to metabolize the poison into beauty, right? To alchemize the pain and turn it into joy and to even fuel for your dreams. So I guess that's my next question for you is, now that you have done a lot of healing, and obviously healing is a lifelong journey, but now that you have this like visceral experience of sexuality is sacred, this is a pathway to the divine, it is an alchemical force, how do you feel like it has made you a better person, and how has it allowed you to be of greater service?
Yeah. Well, you spoke of it, of pleasure as love, and that's so, I love that. I have not heard of that, but it makes so much sense because the thing for me is that the reason why this is the answer to your question is because prior, I was operating from a place of unworthiness. And so that was running my relationships. It was running everything I did in life. And so how can I be of service if I feel unworthy to be? If I feel like I don't have, if I don't have a beautiful thing to say, how can I teach, right? Like there's all of these stories of unworthiness. The thing with pleasure and why it is like can be so interchangeable with love is that when we are willing to bathe our nervous system in pleasure, it flips unworthiness on its head because we are loving ourselves in allowing ourselves to feel the pleasure, right? And so that's how it's changed my life in a way that I operate differently in the world is because I'm coming from a place of radical self-love. And what's
And worthiness.
yes, yeah.
And so this is, thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think this is a huge point and a huge link back to manifesting, right? Because I'm really going into pleasure and seeing it as this manifestation tool. That Ziva Magic is
Totally.
really an advanced manifestation course. This is all about embodied manifestation. And the number one issue that I hear folks have is that they're like, Emily, I don't know what I want. And I think that I don't know what I want is bullshit. I think that people do know what they want, but I think people are afraid that they don't deserve it. I think they're not willing to really admit the thing that they do want because they're afraid that they don't deserve it. And so, to your point, if you love yourself more and if your capacity for pleasure is higher, you're going to start to believe that you deserve your desires. Your worthiness is going to increase because you know how to prioritize yourself on a daily basis. And actually, if you have the capacity to receive physical pleasure, then that same muscle is going to give you the capacity to receive your dream when it shows up. That dream person, that dream number in the bank account, that dream job, you have to also believe that you are worthy for it or you will self-sabotage. So
Right.
this is like building that muscle. So I'm so glad
Yeah.
that pleasure has allowed you to feel more worthy.
Yeah, well, there's a second part of that answer, but
Okay.
to pull on that thread, um, when you don't know what you want, for me, pleasure. So, like when I'm prior to pleasure, I may be hearing all these different voices, like, and it's just when I'm in my pleasure, I hear from my highest truth. Like all those voices disappear. And it was actually in your, I don't know if we'll call it the retreat,
I think like
that
the shooting of Ziva Magic, like
the
the
shooting of Ziva Magic,
uh-huh.
it was in the pleasure prayer is
Mm-hmm.
what you called it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I had this desire earlier in the year that I spoke to a coach about how obviously in my relationship I want triple gold, soulmate level, sacred union, like emotional attunement, all of the things. I want it all. What I desired differently in this next partnership that I hadn't had previously was also like a feeling of a provider and a protector. because I'm a single mom of an 9-year-old who I've been doing it alone with no help from their father, providing Montessori, all the things. And I wanted that to also be a part of my next partnership. When I spoke that to a coach, she said, it sounds like you're looking for a savior. And I felt so much shame in that moment. And so I kind of pushed away that desire. And it was in pleasure prayer that my pleasure, my higher self said, fuck that. I am a queen knowing what I desire. And I'm desiring my king to come alongside me
Yes.
and co-create this vision with me, and that is
Yes.
a part of what my desire is as the feminine. And so it was in pleasure prayer while feeling pleasure that I was able to really know what I wanted. And the thing is the pleasure, it's not that I was pushing away the shame that I felt before, but the pleasure was able to dialogue with it, and then I was able to be more clear about what I actually wanted and why. And then that's when you can actually own it, like you're saying, and that's when you can actually magnify it.
Oh, I love this so much. And because I think so many people can relate to this. It's like they want something, they get some coaching on it. Maybe you take someone else's advice, but they don't have the whole picture. But yes, it's nice to have an advisory committee. Yes, it's great to have coaches and therapists and friends. But at the end of the day, we are accountable to one person and one person only, and that is our future selves. Right? Like that is like the highest incarnation of ourselves. And I fully believe that you are worthy of and deserve to have divine union partnership that has that provider protector, because it's a frequency, really.
Yeah.
It's a frequency. Can someone provide or protect? It's not, it's different than savior, but it's
Right.
like, does my nervous system soften?
Yeah.
Can they step up if I were to fall? Can I step up if they were to fall? So that any healthy union knows that it ebbs and flows. But if your nervous system can't soften with that person, you're going to stay in this vigilant, I have to do it all myself mode.
Yeah.
So really celebrating you and owning that, and celebrating the fact that that highest truth came through during what's essentially a medicine ceremony, but we're just working with our own internal medicine.
Yeah.
So I guess on that note, I'd love to just hear, you left me the sweetest voice note after we finished shooting Ziva Magic, and I'll share a little bit what I remember from memory, but then I'd love for you to share what it was like to experience Ziva Magic, like being there on the shooting of it. But what I remember you saying is that it felt like a 2-day ayahuasca ceremony, even though there was a whole film set around, and that you felt really safe, and that ended up being really potent medicine, even though there was a million reasons why it should not have been the case. You've got a boom mic, you've got sound operators, 3 cameras in your face, lights, we're shooting for 12 hours a day. Like, it was not optimal retreat setting. It was a film set, and yet the healing that happened was very profound for all of us, myself included. So I would just love to hear, one, what was it like for you? And two, like, what would you share about Ziva Magic to someone who's not yet experienced it?
Yeah. Yeah. I spoke on my podcast about the type of container that you held, and
Mhm.
that there was something about what I think really made the difference. There was something about how, even though you were leading the experience, you really treated everyone in the room as a peer and as someone that you wanted to co-create with, and as someone who, like, you wanted to share their, like, you constantly, like, asked us what we thought and how we were feeling and if we had anything to share. And so there was this feeling of like, um, you really saw us as your equals, which had this feeling of like, it brought this empowerment into the room where everyone felt like, um, you know, you can think of it as, like, I guess the way I think of my inner emotions is like the throne of my heart, where it's like I've got the queen at the head, and then I've got the fear and the shame, and I've got the joy and the bliss. They're all there. But it felt like that experience. It was like we were all had a seat at the table. It wasn't like sometimes you experience someone leading a retreat, and it's like they are the leader and they want their voice to be the loudest, and it's like you know what I mean? And so there was this feeling of like everyone in the room could be in their queen and like really experience that level of empowerment in the processes that you were guiding us through, and the type of people that you I guess I don't know what word to,
Magnetize?
sorry. Yeah.
Magnetize?
Yeah, into your life. I could feel that everyone in the room like really did the work, prior, like whatever their dharma is, whatever their calling is. Like I could tell that everyone that came into that room like it was a safe container. That was something I loved about Layla's retreat, is like the retreat was 9 months into the program. So we'd all journeyed into the underworld and we all came there, and there was this level of safety to do sex magic in a room of 80 people. It felt that way in yours, in that the people that you brought in, there was this level of like, it was so amplified because of the codes that everyone brought in together. And so, I mean, even down to the crew that you selected, it was like you were so intentional about everyone that you brought into the room. And I think a lot of people, well, maybe not a lot, but I think some people have probably experienced a ceremony where it wasn't a safe container, like actually with medicine. And then there's that ceremony where it's like, it is such a tight container and the shaman holds such a, a safe, grounded like cord for you while you're on the medicine. And so it was also that. And whereas like I felt I could drop so deeply and go so deep into whatever was going to come up, because you were holding this like container of safety that also like acted as this like really beautiful grounding cord of like I could go so deep, and you were there as this mother, to everyone in the room.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And my prayer is that safety, that groundedness, that trust that we had in person, that translates through the video. And we've done a few online retreats with this work, with this Ziva magic formula. And what was fascinating the first time we did it is that even in breath work, people said, "Oh my gosh, I felt like you were there with me in the room. Like I felt like someone actually adjusted me, or I just felt held." And so, of course, we have no science to back this up, that, we're not actually physically traveling through space and showing up through your Zoom screen. But there is an element of magic here. Like there is an element of the intention and the presence, and the prayers are bigger than just what's happening locally, right? That there is
Yeah.
a little bit of non-local magic happening. And so, obviously we haven't released the course just yet at the time of this taping, but my prayer is that safety and that permission and that feeling held translates, even though this is an online course. And so I'm really glad that was your experience. And just to name it, like, of the people on set, we had some people like yourself who do this professionally and who've done a lot of work, but we also had a lot of people who are brand new to this work. And so regardless of where you are starting, I would say most people that come to me are beginners. And that's something I feel really proud of,
Yeah.
um, because I think it's a big responsibility of how people get initiated and introduced to this work. And it's why I've spent the past 4 years working on languaging and messaging, and what words inspire curiosity versus create contraction. Um and so my prayer is also that this just ends up being a permission slip for people, that they
Yeah.
have permission to be curious, permission
Yeah.
to be inside of their own bodies, and permission to use their pleasure to pray, maybe for the first time. Because I think for many of us, we've been taught and constrained and conditioned that it's so separate, that there's prayer and there's pathway to God and there's church and there's divine. And then anything that has to do with the body or pleasure, like that's something else. That's something other. That's a pathway to hell.
Yeah.
And to me, and this is part of why I love the Vedas so much. So I've been studying this beautiful, like, I guess, ideology from ancient India, and it very much celebrates the humanity and the totality, that it's 50% individuality and 50% totality inside of the techniques, inside of the imagery, inside of the iconography. But that this idea in the Vedas is that there's only one thing, and we're all it, and
Yeah.
that one thing is consciousness. And so because that is my background and I see the divine in everything, including myself,
Yes.
that has very much been the lens through which I've entered this work of sacred sexuality, and that I see it all as a pathway to the divine. And so now, whereas I used to get a little bit maybe ashamed or like judgmental of myself, and I would find new traumas, I would find new blocks, I would find new insecurities, I would find new, stuffs that I would judge as less than or made me worse, made me, whatever my judgment was of myself. Now I actually get excited when I see those limitations, when I see those blocks, when I see those
Yeah.
traumas, was like, oh, good. Like this is like a little packet of energy that I now have an opportunity to look at, to love, to heal, to transmute, and then to integrate. And now it feels like it gives me more superpowers, right? It's like you eat the mushroom on Super Mario Brothers, and you're like, do, 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 and like your energy body gets bigger because
Yeah.
you integrate the trauma that has been sucking your energy, and then it gives you back. You get to reclaim more of that pleasure and life force as your own.
Yeah, and then it gives you this feeling of, instead of like, oh my God, am I ever going to be done with the trauma? Instead, it's this feeling of like, oh, like, thank you. You feel ready to be held too, you know? And that's another thing though. You brought up the virtual.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I love, even in virtual trainings, is like when you sign up for someone's program, when you sign up for coaching with someone, you're also signing up for their transmission. Like, they are that fast track pass of all the work that they've done. And there was a level of integrity that I could feel from you because of how you treated everyone, the way that I spoke of, where I could feel like I wanted, like, I was there for the weekend, but I could feel if I were to sign up for this program as someone, that's just hearing about it for the first time, like, that is a transmission that I want to pay for, to be able to experience, is like all of the work that you've done, like, that is something that I want a fast track pass to, So it's also that when it comes to virtual, even like with it not being present there and in
Mm-hmm.
person. But I totally agree. Like, you can feel the collective even on a virtual call, which is really beautiful. And speaking to the fear that you brought up too, that was like my second answer to the previous question of pleasure and how I show up in the world, is like, I used to really fear all those things that you brought up, like the judgment, the voices of shame. Like, I was so afraid of them. And
Mm-hmm.
now I'm not afraid of anything that's going to arise in me. Like, there's not a single emotion that I am afraid that I cannot face, because I know that pleasure, interchangeable with love, I can hold them side by side. They can hold each other and they can coexist. And they're like, that, whatever that is, the depression, the self-critic, the judgment, it's not going to steal that pleasure from me. It's not going to steal that self-love. It's actually they actually like kind of are allies for each other when they can coexist, And that changes how I operate in the world, because I'm not afraid of like not being good enough. And it's
Oh.
actually what, like, I was so afraid that it meant I wasn't qualified to teach.
Mm.
And it's actually what qualifies me to teach, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That the very thing that you were afraid made you unworthy actually can become your superpower if you love yourself enough to accept it, if you feel brave enough to integrate it and to transmute it. And
Yeah.
to me, that is alchemy, right? That you're alchemizing something that was keeping you from your dream, and you're alchemizing it into something that gets you closer to your dream. And
Yeah.
that really is the Ziva magic formula, right? Like, we visualize, what do I want? And that might be, how do I want to feel in my body? How worthy do I want to feel? Or it might be a person or a number or a job, but what do I want? And then you visualize that. And then you alchemize anything standing in the way. And in the course, we do this through, movement, through dancing sacred rage, dancing sacred sorrow. But really, it's the skill of feeling your feelings, and
Yeah.
it's doing it in community, it's doing it with music, it's doing it in a way that becomes creative and fun and safe and playful, because otherwise we're just never going to do it. Like, nobody wants to feel their feelings, right? We've all been trained since childhood that it's like the worst thing we could do and it's going to make us weak. So but if you do it with like friends and a great playlist, it can actually be fun, and then you're loving that trauma into being fuel to magnetize your dream. And
Yeah.
just to name, because I know we've gone pretty deep down the rabbit hole with like terminology, and you're very experienced in this work, and work with clients with using pleasure and reclaiming sacred sexuality. And just to name, the in Ziva Magic, it's a bit more beginner. Like, we are just working with breath and energy. There's no actual self touch. So it's totally fine for beginners. But what we're doing is, like you said, it's like your partners. It's like the pain and the pleasure become partners. And then, really, the pleasure and the prayer become partners, because we really believe that the better you feel, the higher quality things you're going to attract. So
Mhm.
we're just lighting ourselves up, turning on our magnet, turning up our magnetism, so that we become an energetic match for that which we desire, and not an energetic match for all the trauma. Like what you said, like, if I was attracting men that were an imago match for my father, right? Like, we all do that inadvertently because we have to learn those lessons, right? We're not going to get out of this life without learning that lesson.
Yeah.
And so I also find that the alchemy like fast tracks that, of like, what even karmically are you attracting? But if you're willing to feel it, metabolize it, integrate it, you don't have to spend 8 years in a relationship learning that lesson. It's like, no, let me just feel my anger at my dad. Let me just integrate that. And then I don't have to spend 8 years doing it on a guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you have that level of I can meet it all with love, I can find God there and I can accept it all. What is there really to be afraid of? Like
Oh,
you're not even afraid of heartbreak anymore. You're not
oh,
afraid of any of it because you know that you can accept what you're going through and you can hold it with love. And I used to think that I had to. I know we both love being a student, but I used to, and I always will be. But I used to think that I had to be like all of these, like the eagle. I had to be the eagle, and I had
what does that mean? Like an Eagle Scout? Or what does
like
eagle
like
mean?
like like the embodied queen who's like always, like just radiating love and joy and there is a part of me that's always going to have a little bit of chicken in there instead of eagle. There's going to be a part of me that, like gets insecure. And it's, if I'm constantly trying to silence those, like you said, like we spoke of earlier, it doesn't actually work. And when I can just say I'm all of it, like I'm all of it, I'm the chicken and the eagle, like it
Mm.
takes away so much pressure that we put on ourselves of what you were saying earlier to not feel those parts of ourselves. And that I've been doing that work for so long and even coaching people on it. And I went through this devastating breakup and I started to develop heart palpitations that were happening so often that sometimes at night I was like, should I write a letter to my loved ones just in case? Because that's how bad the palpitations had become. And the beautiful part of that is I was like, I love those in my life so damn well. No one doubts my love. Like if I go tonight, no one doubts my love. So that was a beautiful little
Yes.
part of it. But it got so bad that I had a mini stroke. And it was in the ER that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm pushing my grief away. I'm pushing down all the parts of myself that didn't show up as queen. And yes, I want to show up as queen, but I can't shame those parts of myself that aren't there yet or that still struggle. Like they're always going to be there. I have to
And it
love
is the
them.
integration of them that makes you a queen. Like, that
Right.
is the paradox of it, right? That it's like, if we don't love that part and integrate and face those fears and be in that darkness and know that that is God too, then
Yes.
it's a facade, right? It's like you're just looking at half of an equation.
And we're fragmented and at war with ourselves because it's part of us. And so I'm in the ER and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing what I know to do. And I put my hand on my heart and I said to the grief, you can just be here. You don't have to go anywhere. As long as you need, you can be. And I will love you and I will pleasure alongside you and I will dance with you. And I didn't have a single palpitation after that. And I had been having them I mean, every minute for months. And
Mm.
so that's an example of like, I removed the fear of the grief. I no longer feared it anymore. And then I wasn't like fragmented within myself where my heart was like even at war. Um,
And this is a beautiful example of like whatever is the portal, right? These
yeah,
heart palpitations, this mini stroke, it was your body like needing you to pay attention, needing you to feel this grief, needing it to feel acknowledged. And through that portal, like what an integration, what a reclamation.
yeah,
Bravo.
yeah.
Wow. Well, so we're nearing the end of our time. Is there anything that you wish that I had asked you? Is there anything that you were like, oh man, I really wanted to share this on the show?
Mm, I don't know if there's anything I wish you would have asked. I think that if there's anything that I would add, um, it's that, bringing along those parts of us that we normally suppress, that we normally don't feel, um, into our pleasure. To me, it's because it can almost sound bypassy at times, but for me, it's actually, I feel them more. But when I feel them more, it's like I move through the emotion more since emotions are energy and motion. Like when I'm in grief and I bring it into my pleasure, I have crygasms and I feel the grief move the way that it needs to move. And so there's the power of that in our pleasure as well. And what I think it does, alongside bathing our nervous system in a way that flips the unworthiness on its head and helps us to not fear anything that comes up, is it helps us, it rewires that, like that wire and fire within us of it translates. Because I'd done all the inner child work, I'd done all the internal family systems. It's all beautiful. But it wasn't until I brought those same methods into my pleasure that it actually translated into all areas of my life. In that, when I'm in conflict with a partner, because as you teach, pleasure really magnifies and amplifies everything. So because I was able to hold those parts and let them oscillate, when I'm in conflict with a partner, instead of just becoming that little girl that was left in the field at 3 years old and thinking like he's going to abandon me and like what if he doesn't answer the phone and whatever it is, my nervous system it's already become such a pathway to have my wise woman enter into that field and hold my little girl. And because my wise woman knows how to do it, my partner knows how to do it now too, for me, with
Mm.
me. But it was really when I entered into that, bringing pleasure into all of those processes, that it like actually became a rewire, where it's not so hard, in the heat of the moment, because it's that pathway's already there.
Oh, wow, that's really big that you're rewiring those pathways for yourself, and the pleasure is expediting the rewiring so that when a triggering situation comes up, or so that when you're in a relationship and you want to default to another old pattern, you've already like changed the neuropeptide connection in the brain so that you're not defaulting to the old wounded child. It's like, oh no, I know from this place of pleasure, from this place of reclamation, my brain is firing in this new way because I've used the pleasure to like pave that neural pathway in my
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. And like,
Yeah.
this to me is one of the reasons why we even created Ziva Magic. So it's like in your own time, in a safe way around a dream, you can like basically tell your body that it's safe to dream. Let this dream
Yeah.
feel safe in your nervous system so that when it shows up, it feels like you're greeting a long lost lover instead of like, oh no, this opportunity is going to make or break me. And while we don't really lead with the trauma piece of it, that is also certainly a massive benefit, because the same way that you're rewiring yourself to believe that you deserve your dreams, it also rewires you out of believing that I do not deserve this trauma anymore. It's like an entire system upgrade,
Yeah. It
which,
becomes trauma informed but pleasure led.
ooh, yes, trauma informed but pleasure led. We're putting that on the website. All right, Jade, where can people find you? I know, so Untamed and Unashamed is your podcast. Where else can people find you?
Yes, that's my podcast, and you recently aired. It's one of my favorite episodes, so love for people to check that
It
out.
was actually one of my favorite interviews I've ever done as well. So
It
thank
means
you.
so much. And then jade-bryce.com is where you can sign up for my newsletter, Pleasure Ponderings, one-on-one coaching or women's program. And then my Instagram is at the Jade Bryce. And I share a lot of behind the scenes there. I'm a mom of two. So yeah.
Which is amazing. You're just a miracle. You're a living miracle. And I feel
Mhm.
so happy to have you as a friend and as an ally. And I feel so grateful to have your beauty and your strength and your transmission and your alchemical force inside of Ziva Magic. So truly, thank you for being part of its birthing, and thank you for today. And folks, if you enjoyed this episode, I imagine that you've learned I've learned a lot, and I hope that everyone listening to this as well. So if you did, what I invite you to do is, take a screenshot of this, share it on Instagram. You can tag me at Ziva Meditation. You can tag Jade at the Jade Bryce. And we'd love to hear, what were your takeaways? Like, is there something that was new for you? Is there an aha moment? And if this is coming out, then that means that Ziva Magic is already out. So you can definitely go to zivameditation.com and check out Ziva Magic and see where we are in that process. But we love you, and thank you, thank you, thank you for listening. And we'll see you next week on Why Isn't Everyone Doing This?